Okay, welcome to our fourth installment of these mixing tutorial videos, and this one is going to focus on equalization. I'm looking at the equalization or the channel EQ on the Vox. To add this in, there's two ways in which you can do it. You can see where it says EQ, click on that and that'll bring up your equalization. Also just make sure that it is turned on before you start. First thing I'm going to highlight for you here is the analyzer. And the way that the analyzer works is it's actually detecting the vocal sample in this case.
Then there's a hold on you. Look out, you're almost strangled blue.
And from this, what we can see is where and which frequencies in particular are in the vocal range. Now, it's worth noting that the human ear can typically hear from 20 Hz up to 20 kilohertz, hence the range that is evident in this equalization. Anything below 20 Hz is very, very difficult to detect. In fact, in most headphones, you're very unlikely to be able to hear below 50 Hz, and that's just simply the speakers not being able to reproduce that. If you've got a decent sub, it can actually get down to those lower levels, but in most cases, you're not going to hear much below 50 Hz. But it is still worth noting that anything below that is still contained in the mix and can actually be interfere with other things that are happening in this. So with this, we can see that our vocal range, we've got a bit of a peak that's sort of just below 200 Hz or around this area, but the majority of it is actually in this range here between about 350 Hz up to 2 kilohertz. So that's really important to know because there's a lot of instruments that are going to be in that range. So with this, if I just play a bit more and just take notice of where we're seeing these peaks.
Then there's a hold on you. Look out, you're almost strangled blue.
Now what's also important to note is different notes, depending on what the singer is singing, the different pitches are going to feature at different points. So frequency is actually pitch as well. So within this, we know that A is around 440 Hz. So if he sings in A, we should see there's actually a peak around that. We'll explore that a bit more later, but just something worth keeping in mind. So in our EQ, after we've had a look at the analyzer, the next thing we want to have a look at is this here. This is called a high pass filter. It really pays to get these around the right way. High pass filter lets higher frequencies through. Anything below it is cut out. So what we can see here is this area here means that these frequencies have been reduced. Now if I play this again,
then there's a hold on you. Look out.
We shouldn't hear any difference to the sound. As I said, these frequencies here, first of all, aren't going to be reproduced in the headphones, but also they're not important to the vocal track, so we don't need to have those in there. It is good to practice to include a high-pass filter on your tracks, particularly where you don't have anything. So we're looking at the vocals, the slide guitar, the acoustic guitar. Obviously the bass is going to be featuring in this lower region, so we're not going to put it on that, as well as our kick drums. So what we're doing by doing this is any unwanted rumble and sound we're getting rid of, which is going to free up room for our kick drum and our bass to be able to feature in that region. Having a look at this, overall our EQ sound is not too bad. So what we're going to do instead is have a look at the different functions. Down the bottom here, we also have these three values. These values here indicate different parts on this, and we can easily move these along just by sliding them along. Now, if you need to reset anything, for example, if I pull this up, I can hold down Option, click on there, and it resets that value. So the first thing that we can change and look at here is the frequency, the actual frequency that we're going to be affecting. Below this, we can boost this up, or we can cut it. In most instances, you're looking to make very, very small boosts or cuts. You don't need to do anything too drastic unless there is a reason to do that, such as our high-pass filter, because we're not using those frequencies at all. Just to give you an idea of what it sounds like and what can be useful practice, if I make a boost like this, we can see it's affecting the majority of the frequencies in the vocal range. Below this, we have the Q, or the bandwidth. If I increase this, we see that it affects a narrower range of frequency. If I reduce it, it affects more. So in most instances, and particularly when we're starting off, we want to work with a fairly narrow range, such as this. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to play the song, and I'm just going to do a little bit of a sweep through to hear how it affects different frequencies and just what that sounds like.
Then there's a hold on you. Look out, you're almost strangled blue, drawn like a raggedy heart on a bad tattoo. Wake up and drop that suit. Strip down and face your naked truth. It's been so wrong, so long.
So as we go through, we can hear different parts that really seem to leap out at us. They are characteristics of the vocals. Now, sometimes those parts are actually things that we want to reduce. Maybe they're not quite sitting the way that we want them to in the mix. For example, this frequency around here, which is at the very lower end of the vocal range, is just sounding a little bit, I'm going to say almost, it does add to the overall sound, but to me it actually is not a pleasant sound that we're adding. So I'm just going to do a little cut, again, not much.
Then there's a hold on you. Look out.
It just takes a little bit of, it's almost a rumble in the vocal, and sometimes that can be things such as the microphone stand being hit, which is more likely to be down here, but it's a characteristic, and in this case, I want to get rid of that. Now, the vocal range, one area that's sort of important is between this 1 kilohertz to 2 kilohertz. And something that we want to do with our EQ, which is very similar to pen, is make sure there is room in the mix for the instrument. So I'm going to grab this one, I'm going to drag it back to about 2 kilohertz. And what we're going to do is we're going to reduce by increasing, it sounds a bit strange, but we're going to reduce the bandwidth, and I'm just going to put it up a little bit, maybe 4.5 dB, just bring it out a bit more so we get a nice little peak like this, which is a relatively smooth peak. Now with this, what I'm also going to do is in this range here, our competing instrument is usually the electric guitar. It's notorious for competing with the vocal. So I'm going to come to this one, I'm going to jump into this EQ, and I've actually prepared it already at the same range. If I add this in here, what we're actually doing is taking a little bit of that frequency out of the electric guitar, which then frees up our vocal to feature in that region. Now, without that, we have this.
Then there's a hold on you. Look out, you're almost strangled blue, drawn like a raggedy heart on a bad tattoo. Wake up and drop.
So it's a very subtle difference. It might be actually quite hard to detect when you're listening to this, but it's a little technique that really just helps to make sure that the vocals have their own place in the mix. And again, a lot of what I'm doing is focused around the vocal, because that should be the most important part of this mix. Our next step that we're going to be having a look at is expanding into mixing for the drums and focusing on each part individually.